You have to find the right type of customer who has the resources to pay for your solution. And once you've kind of identified that, so you've identified a problem that matters for a specific type of customer in a meaningful way, the pain is great, and they basically have the money to pay for it, that's when you've got the foundation to build a business.
To say like the problem needs to be connected with the two pillars, reduce cost or make more money.
That's my fundamental belief. Oh, great. We'll celebrate that insight. Why wouldn't I take some of the knowledge I've gained in the last 30 years and try to break it down in a way that's consumable and easy to understand, and that these people, tech founders in this case, can apply it and help them be more successful in what they do. And I'll be honest with you, I used to close 10s and 20 and 30 and $50 million deals in my previous roles, but the first 5,000 euro agreement that I built on my back and to help a founder build their business felt 10 times more rewarding than the $50 million deal that I closed for somebody else. I've always considered How to Web one of those stages that I'd love to be on at one stage. And it seems like it's obviously in a great market. Romania is a fantastic market and one that's consistently growing. I've worked with a lot of Romanian founders, so I think this is the right time, the right place to be on stage and share my insights on sales to founders in the country.
And thank you very much for being here, Zoltan. And for me, it was inspiring to read your book. And I searched for the inbound marketing, where I'm building the product now. Then I looked in framing the problem, and I still have questions. Mm-hmm. But the first and the most important question that popped into my mind is how you make sales without manipulating people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the challenge is actually in the way you've actually phrased the question, and that sales is somehow manipulative, right? I think sales...
That's the culture.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the perception you get from, movies and TV series and a little bit of that kind of slimy sort of sales approach where you're trying to convince somebody to buy something they don't need. But I think that's actually the fundamental misconception about selling, or at least the type of sales that I believe is successful. At the end of the day, people have problems, needs, they want to solve a particular situation. And when you position your service or your product as a solution to a very specific problem, then you are actually positioning yourself as somebody who helps rather than somebody who tries to force somebody. And I can completely relate to the perspective that you might have on this, because I actually had the same situation. So I actually talk about in the book how, I was growing up in an environment where my parents were academics, right? They were both professors. And our conversations around the dinner table or around politics and history and culture and things like that. We never talked about commercial issues or sales or anything. And I recall this happening several times where somebody would call our house generally to sell something, and my mother would pretend to be the maid, and she would say that the Vardy family had moved to Europe and not to call back again. So that was kind of the environment in which I was growing up. And so imagine the shock of my parents that ultimately I'd grow into somebody who's grown $2 billion worth of deals over the course of my 30-year career. But what changed my perception was actually some work that I've been doing in my first job in sales. I was selling advertising on Cartoon Network in Central and Eastern Europe, including Romania, by the way, in the 90s.
I learned English from Cartoon Network.
So I think that's kind of one of the feedbacks I get from a lot of people who hear that. So in some ways, I'm responsible not just for generating advertising revenue, but for teaching people English. So that's a nice legacy to have.
That's why we have this podcast.
Exactly. It could well be. And so it was in that job that I was facing this same challenge of like, okay, well, do I really want to force people to buy something? And my boss at the time, I remember very clearly, we were on a business trip to Russia. We were sitting in this taxi on the way into from the airport into central Moscow, and he said, look, Zoltan, sales isn't about forcing people to buy something they don't need. It's about helping them solve a problem. And that really clicked for me, because it made me realize that if I accept that as the foundation of selling, then two things happen. One, I'm providing a service, and there are people who will benefit from that service, and there are people that will not benefit from that service. As a result, I might find that I'm talking to somebody who can't benefit from what I'm offering, and I accept that, and I move on, and I look for people who will. I don't take it personally. Right? I take it as part of the process. And if you adopt that mindset, what you'll actually find is that you will be much more comfortable in the whole discussion. You will be supportive rather than forceful. And you will accept that in some cases it'll be a perfect fit. In other cases, it won't be a fit, and you move on. And so that type of mentality is something that if you adopt, you'll find you'll just be much more successful, and you'll enjoy it, right? Because at the end of the day, life is too short to do stuff that you don't like, right? I mean, especially when you're building a business. I mean, it's such a difficult road. There's so many challenges. If you accept sales this way, you'll find it's much more enjoyable.
Yeah, you open so many threads with this answer. Like, like my head went haywire in different places because, like your answer, it was so spot on. But at the same time, it opened a thread. And a thread that I see most of the time when I see startup founders who are building a solution. And I don't know if you know the kid who is trying to force to put the cube into the triangle.
Yeah.
Trying to push it and push it and push it. And I feel that that's the moment when they try to create artificial problems.
Absolutely.
To put their product in. And at the same time, if they force it enough, some people believe them. And I'm really asking, like, how you figure out a good problem to solve, because most of the time, if you already build a solution, you'll have that loss aversion. I don't know, I remember how it's correctly, that you don't want to lose what you built, but at the same time, how you navigate that uncertainty and that identity crisis at the same time.
Yeah. I think you captured the challenge so clearly. It's I've built this thing, and now I need something to use it for, right? And I just have to say that the natural follow on from the previous answer I had is that ultimately you shouldn't do that, right? You should find a problem, identify the problem, and then build a solution, right? And I think that's what's a real challenge for a lot of technically focused founders who fall in love with their technology. And if there's one thing I've learned over the course of 30 years is people don't buy features, they buy benefits, right? They don't buy the thing you do, they buy what your thing helps them do. And I think if you understand that, it's such a mind-blowing change. And I talk about one of the customers I work with, a company called Banners. And they actually had in the book, and I talk about how they had developed this very unique streaming technology. And so they had the streaming technology, and they went out searching for a problem. And the road they traveled is really interesting, right? So they started saying, well, we're going to help. They had some exposure to Asia. They're like, well, a lot of people are during COVID, they were using the streaming technology to provide a platform for coaches to provide services online to their customers, right? It was kind of the COVID era when everything was online. That sort of died out. And then they said, okay, well, I see there's a lot of online shopping and streaming going on in Asia. We're going to use it as a platform to help people sell online. Then they tried to do that in Europe. It didn't work. Then they said, okay, well, we're going to use the technology to make advertising on websites more effective by streaming ads within Banners. That didn't get traction. And it wasn't until they actually discovered a problem, which is that there are a lot of media companies that are broadcasting sports online, and they're looking for ways to create interactive engagement with their viewers online, that they said this technology could solve for that problem. And since they've established that problem solution connection, their business has taken off. And the best way, this guy Peter, who was the co-founder, said, we had a product looking for a problem, and we didn't have a problem that we could use to solve with a product. And if you take that shift and you accept that, then you actually save yourself a lot of grief. But it does require you to let go of certain assumptions, right? And that's kind of sometimes the toughest thing to do, right, when you're building a business.
Pentru că ai dat de gust, te întrerup să zic că LaunchPod dă voce poveștilor de startup-uri românești cu un twist global. Podcastul este o inițiativă a Launch Romania, powered by BCR, cu sprijinul Google și în colaborare cu partenerul nostru fondator, How2Web, și partenerul nostru media, start-up.ro. I want to give a more flavor to this. Mm-hmm. And I see that you reframe it and you went into the part where people buy outcomes. Like I'm very passionate about jobs to be done.
Yeah.
So because of jobs to be done, I have this idea of input system, output and outcome, and products are offering output to get to the outcome, and everyone feature and benefits is the same translation. But at the same time, I see people who are like putting a very bold outcome benefit just to sell it. But at the end, the features or the product, it's not delivering that.
Yeah. So they're over-promising, basically.
Yeah, over-promising. And it's really hard for an early stage startup where you position, because you need, most of the time the discussion is about you should have an advantage over the competitors.
Yeah.
So after 4 months of development, you can't beat a competitor that has 6-7 years. It's delusional to have this mindset. But at the same time, you're solving a problem for them. How you position in order for you to, like, for me, that's a question that it's quite hard. Like, one of the questions that we get from investors is how you have the moat for defensibility against others in the market. They say we are 4 months and we are almost near to competition.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, I think it's a process, right? So the process of developing that problem-solution connection I referred to earlier takes time. And I think you have to start with certain assumptions. You have to start with assumptions about what problem you solve, who you solve it for, and how you solve it better than anybody else. Those are the assumptions you make. Now, hopefully you've done a bit of research. Hopefully you're working on a problem that maybe you've personally experienced, right? That's always a very typical situation. So you yourself is the target audience. And if you've established that basis, then you go out and you start testing those hypotheses, right? You start talking to the type of customers you think would be most relevant. You reach out to them. You engage with them through an outreach process. You listen to them. You test it. And it's that iterative process that ultimately, if you're patient enough and you pick the right bits, you'll eventually reach, kind of the product market fit, which is what everybody is after.
The Holy Grail.
The Holy Grail, exactly. In terms of what you promise, look, it's a delicate balance, right? Because if you've got a product that you believe solves an important problem, does it effectively, but it's no different than what everybody else does, then you either need to provide that next level of solution, right? So the basis for solution was X, but you're saying it's X plus Y because you think it's a much bigger problem and you're solving it a different way, or you're actually positioning it as your approach to solving that problem, which is your system, your approach, something that's better, faster, more efficient. And I think you need to promise something that feels like it's a little bit of a stretch, and then you ultimately let your product grow into that. If you do it too conservatively, which is very typical, by the way, of technology-focused founders, that they don't want to overpromise, then unfortunately you might not get people's attention. Yeah? And so, there's this expression, fake it till you make it, right? Which is sometimes a little bit overused. But there is some element of that, right? You have to be aspirational in the way that you position your problem. I'll give you an example through my own experience with my own service. So what I do is I've created, at the very surface, I help founders like you learn how to sell and market to big customers. That's the basis. Now, there are a lot of people out there that can claim this, that have experience doing this, that have done it before. I have created a system built on 3 pillars: focus your offer message, structure your client acquisition, and scale your operations, that captures my 30 years of experience working in the corporate world, but also working with founders. That's my approach. That's what makes my approach unique, is the way that it's built on my experience. And I gave it a name. I called it the Launch Code. And actually, I'm not telling you very much things differently than you might hear from others with similar backgrounds. But I've created my system, and I believe that to be effective, and I've proven it to be effective through my relationships with founders. And I think that's as far as you can go, right? I mean, you've got to then build the credibility around your solution based on the effects you have on your customers. And it also presumes that it's not a zero-sum game. It's not like if you win, then others don't, and vice versa. You are simply offering just a different alternative. And if you stay that way and you push it that way, then you'll find that, there'll be other alternatives for customers, but you think yours is the most effective, and that's why you should, push for that. So it's not a question of if they win, I lose. We can both win. We just win with different customers.
Okay. And same, I have like two threads, like my brain goes places, and it's kind of fun. The two parts that I want to take the discussion is, first and foremost, and it's a question that I wanted to start the discussion, but I wanted to get your perspective on sales, is how you find good problems to solve.
Yeah. Well, look, I think one of the most important things that you have to identify is it a problem that is relevant for a typical type of customer, right? So is it a problem that affects enough people and affects enough of the same type of people to be meaningful, right? So you can have, I'm going to make this up. This sounds silly, but you might have a fantastic new bow for left-handed fiddle players, but if there are not enough left-handed fiddle players, it doesn't matter, right? You can't scale, right? So you've got to have a problem that's meaningful, and it's meaningful for enough people. Next, the problem has got to be so intense or the pain so great that people are willing to take action to solve it, right? So many times you have a lot of companies built on nice to have solutions, right? Yeah, it's nice to have, but honestly, if I don't have it, nothing's going to change that much. The need to have problems in enterprise sales solve two issues. They generate more revenue or they save costs. Everything else, from building efficiency to making his employees feel better about themselves, to all the other stuff which can be useful and can be beneficial, are nice to have problems. If you can show how you will save costs and generate revenues, that's a need to have problem, right? Because every company is built on that principle. The next question then is, are people willing to pay you to solve for that problem, right? Because there could be a whole bunch of companies and a whole bunch of customers that recognize the problem, recognize need, but they don't have the resources to pay you for the solution at the level that it makes sense for you to sell it, right? I'll be honest with you, I find that a lot of times in my business, right? I'll talk to a lot of customers and a lot of potential prospects of founders who understand sales is important, don't understand sales, but they just don't have the resources to pay for my services, which is unfortunate. But since I run a business, I've got to find customers who have that financial backing or have that initial traction where they can afford to pay me for my services. So you have to find the right type of customer who has the resources to pay for your solution. And once you've kind of identified that, so you've identified a problem that matters for a specific type of customer in a meaningful way, the pain is great, and they basically have the money to pay for it, that's when you've got the foundation to build a business.
To say, like, the problem needs to be connected with the two pillars: reduce cost or make more money.
That's my fundamental belief. Oh, great. We'll celebrate that insight. We'll celebrate that insight. Yeah, absolutely. And look, and a lot of people might say, "Oh, well, that's not true because I can help companies become more efficient, or I'm going to make my employees more. I'm going to help you make your employees happier, and they're going to stick around." Look, all of that is valuable. Look, I've run companies of 1,000 employees, so I know how that's important. But when I had to cut my budget, when the crash of 2008 happened and I needed to cut back, I'll tell you what I did. I cut back the stuff that was non-essential for my core business. I could, know that the sun would get up in the morning tomorrow if I didn't have that. But if it was about saving costs, man, I was very, very interested, right? Because that's something that was immediate. So in times of when the economy is flourishing, when things are going well, all the other stuff could be interesting. But the minute that there's uncertainty in the air, and let's be honest, rarely has there been so much uncertainty in the air as there has been in the last 6 months, then a lot of those things are just going to be put on the back burner. So the only other thought I would add to this at this point is, whatever problem it is that you're trying to solve, make sure it's meaningful for you as well. And the reason that is, and I don't mean you personally, but like you're passionate about solving that problem for whatever reason, because maybe you're personally affected, maybe you're so clear that this is a real problem that you want to solve it. Because if you're working on a problem that you're just not that interested in, it's just too easy to give up, right? I mean, building a business, you might know, is one of the hardest things you'll ever do. And that's why I really, really don't like these I call them hustlers, who are on Instagram and on Facebook telling you how you can become a millionaire overnight and just work 2 hours a day, and they're pictured with their orange Lamborghini and their model girlfriend. Like, all that sounds great and it's all aspirational and everybody wants to feel that way. But honestly, that's not the foundation for a great business, right?
Because after I watch your talk from Texylvania, I start to see more and more of them. Some of them I ignored, some of them they were obvious.
Yeah.
But some of them, like, now I see them, like, when someone is promising me to make 5K per month with 2 hours of work, I say, yeah, sure.
Yeah, and I think it's, look, they're obviously playing to the most base needs, right? Money, success with very little work.
Yes.
Look, every day there are people in the world that win the lottery. That is not a strategy, right? Winning the lottery is not a strategy, right? So it's maybe hope, but you can't build a business on the back of it. So I hate to say it because it's not very popular to say, but building a business is hard work, and you got to get a lot of things right, and you got to be a bit lucky, you got to be a bit smart, and you got to be extremely persistent. But that's the reality. That's what it takes to build a business, and anybody who's built a successful business will support that. And so I think the problem that you solve has got to be meaningful. And I'll give you a great example. I do these sessions where I would judge in these competitions, certain startups. And this one guy was pitching a concept for an app that would identify the health of trees just by kind of pointing at it. I guess it had some algorithm that would look at the trees and make some sort of adjustments or assumptions. Sorry. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, wow, what a weird thing. Like, who would think of looking at what trees and the health of trees and why is that even relevant? And he goes on to say, he said, look, every city has tens of thousands of trees that they're responsible for. And every year they cut down thousands of trees unnecessarily because they make assumptions about the health of trees based on a bunch of information, incorrect data. I'm actually going to save every year thousands of trees. I'm going to save a bunch of cost because cities spend a lot of money, cutting these down. And I'm really passionate about this problem. And it flipped me in a second, right? I was like thinking, wow, what an interesting idea. What an interesting problem. This guy is clearly passionate about solving that problem, something that I would never have thought of in 1,000 years. Yeah. And I haven't followed up with him, but I'm almost certain that he's been successful in kind of implementing this. And I'm sure that just through this connection, he's created a lot of value. And so, if find whatever it is that makes you passionate like that. And I think that's what's going to really be successful 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100.
I let the post to sink it in. It was very motivational, and at the same time I was really curious, because when you're building business into the B2B space, enterprise space, even though you can come with something that you care and you have the passion in your words, the charisma, is it should your why transcend the material thing? Some people build businesses because they want to make the money and the status and what the financial crypto bros are selling.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes I question it if it's a good decision not to starve.
Yeah.
But even though if you don't want to starve, there are better businesses where you can make more money than starting a startup, and a tech startup.
Yeah, look, I think this gets a little bit philosophical in what's important in life, right? I think it depends a little bit on your stage of your life and your career. So I'm in my mid-50s. I had 20 years of my career climbing the corporate ladder. Started out in media and sales, and eventually became CEO of a 1,000-person organization, then global senior vice president of global sales at a major international at NBC Universal. So I kind of rose the corporate ladder. During that stage of my life, which is kind of age 25 to 45. I was worried about making as much money as possible, status, how many people reported you. These were the KPIs of success in the corporate world, right? And by all objective standards, I did pretty well, right? And an interesting thing happened in my mid-40s. I sort of thought, is the purpose of my career to just hit another revenue target for somebody else that somebody else sets for me? And my answer at that stage was, no, actually, I don't care about it anymore. And so I left the corporate world on a very conscious decision. I said, I want to do something more meaningful. And it took me a while. I had a couple of false starts. But it was about 6 years ago. I just thought, you know what? There's a bunch of people out there who just dream about building great businesses, but they lack the necessary skills and experience in a fundamental area, sales and marketing, to do it. So why wouldn't I take some of the knowledge I've gained in the last 30 years and try to break it down in a way that's consumable and easy to understand, that these people, tech founders in this case, can apply it and help them be more successful in what they do. And I'll be honest with you, I used to close tens and 20 and 30 and $50 million deals in my previous roles. But the first 5,000 euro agreement that I built on my back and to help a founder build their business felt 10 times more rewarding than the $50 million deal that I closed for somebody else. And I think somewhere you got to find that why, that passion, that reason to build, because as much as you could be successful maybe in the short term with your financial benefits of doing something different, at the end of the day, you got to do something you love, because if you don't, then why are you on this earth? So I think that's really critical. If you can combine some practical problem solution connection with something you're passionate about, I think it's about as best as it can be. And that's what's going to make you successful in the long term.
Very nice. Good. After this inspirational moment, I will go back into sales. But yeah, it was very nice. And I really felt the energy and the clarity that you shared. And at the same time, uh, it popped up one of the things that it struck me, that it's really hard for early stage startups. Like, you have this story that you're passionate about. You build a product, and we're gonna after this question we're gonna go a little into the product part, because it's really important and people are obsessed about it, and I want to get some myths outside of that. But I want to ask you one simple question. In enterprise, it matters more trust than the product. And I was like curious how you can build that trust when you're an early stage founder who doesn't have a big name or some credentials,
Yeah.
and you need to build that level of, I will give you money with the fame that I have in my corporate ladder.
Yeah.
I will give you and to implement your product, even though I trust you, but your product is not there yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I think to sell to enterprises, which in itself is a kind of a subset of what I help founders do, is a different animal for a couple of reasons. One, I would argue that the trust element is important, but I don't think it's more important than the product. I mean, you can have a very trustworthy relationship, but if you don't have a product to back it up, then I'm not sure you're going to do business, and vice versa. If you've got a lot great product but zero trust, you're not going to do business. So I think it's a combination of the two. The other thing I would say is that you have to adjust your expectations in terms of the process. I have a whole presentation I call cracking the corporate fortress, and I talk about how the foundational challenge of selling to enterprises as a founder is based on the fact that the two sides have a different objective, right? The objective of every corporate decision maker is a flight to safety, right? Safety is what is important to them. That the predictability, the safety of knowing exactly what's going to happen, when, by when, and their entire decision-making process and thinking process is built around that. That's why they have meetings to discuss what they'll discuss in the meeting. That's why every single decision is supported by a 300-page PowerPoint presentation. That's why they start working on their annual budgets in June for the following year, and so on. I lived this for 20 years, so I can speak to this very, very clearly. On the other end, what's the defining characteristic or goal of a startup? It's speed, right? It's getting to things quickly. It's moving forward. It's failing fast, all that stuff. And it's like two cars, crashing together, and it's a setup for disaster. So first part is just understanding that, right? So, the reason that it takes you, 8 to 12 months to get a deal done in enterprise is not because there's bad people or they have ill intentions. It's just the environment in which they operate. So managing expectations on that front is important. How do you crack the corporate fortress in an effective way? Well, you start by identifying the companies that are more likely to be open to what you have to say. I actually categorize them as elephants or deer. So elephants are the big, lumbering market leaders who really don't have a lot of incentive to take chances or risk because they're there whether you like it or not. The deer are more limber. They're still big, but they're an innovative organization because they have something to prove to themselves, or they want to overtake the leader. They want to be more and more limber. So just looking at companies that are sort of, I'd say second tier, still very big, but maybe second tier in their category, have an indication that, maybe they have a startup program, maybe they've got somebody in their organization called the head of innovation, right? So companies that are already indicating or signaling that they're open to these type of things are the ones you should target. The other ones, you shouldn't waste your time on them until you've built so much credibility in your relationship through other deals that you can then sit and say, hey, we've done business with your competitors A, B, and you could be competitor number C. So that's the first thing. The second thing is work on a problem that matters. Okay, and this goes back to some of the earlier conversations we had. The amount of effort you put into closing a commercial deal with an enterprise is so great that it has to matter to them, right? It has to be something that meaningfully moves the needle in terms of revenues, meaningfully moves the needle in terms of efficiency or costs. If it's not meaningful enough, it's not going to be front and center. So that's always an evaluation you have to make. The third, you have to present yourself as a credible partner. How do you build credibility? You can build credibility with very basic things. the quality of the presentations you put together, that you follow up on the time as agreed that you've done. I mean, very basic things I like to say I learned in kindergarten. Be nice, never lie, just kind of like basic stuff. And also it's how you present yourself. When you go to the room, are you dressed in a way that's credible? Do you by any chance happen to have worked even as a summer intern at a company that they've heard of? Because then, that already says, oh, at least they've got some sort of experience in this world. So those are the credibility builders. And then the final piece is the champion, right? Finding somebody in the organization who is not necessarily a decision maker, but somebody who's close to the decision maker and can help shepherd you through the process. I think that's probably the final and most important piece. If you've got an internal champion that you can develop a relationship with, which takes work, then you will have somebody on the inside to help you walk through this process. None of this is going to make it faster, easier, a more pleasant process, but it will increase your chance of success. And I think if you can find those different levers to pull and you do this enough, you will have a couple of successes, which then makes everything else much easier, right? Because the minute you can throw on the slide, we've done business with Procter and Gamble and with this company, already you're past that first trust issue and it becomes much easier. It's the first couple that are difficult.
Yeah, it's like, as you said, the first 5K was more meaningful than the millions you raised in different companies.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically what I understood from your side, it's the part that you need first to have credibility in the high standards of the things that you deliver.
Yeah.
Like deliver on time, deliver with quality, and going into the product side, because we said that these are the two things that matter more.
Yeah.
How do you look in the part, and if you worked with founders, you had founders who didn't feel that their product is good enough, and the challenge of not good enough product to be sold, even though they need to raise money, like they need to put it outside and start to get feedback. How you help them overcome that paralysis? Because for me it was paralysis. Like for me it was so challenging to release the first version for the people who are on the waiting list. That was like people outside of me said, dude, let's move it, ship it as it is. People will use it and will break it and they will come back and they will give you feedback. But I needed a kick in the butt. But at the same time, how you do that with a more, how to say, pleasant way.
And your question is what's the right time to release the product? Or
yeah, and how you make people understand what's good enough.
Well, I think that's going to change in so many, it's going to be impacted by so many different factors. But, there's this concept of the minimum viable product, right? The MVP. Obviously, it should have something and some qualities that at least demonstrate your ability to solve the problem you're solving, right? It doesn't mean that they have to solve it perfectly, as quickly as possible, as effectively as possible, but at least it has to demonstrate that whatever problem you're looking to solve, it can solve it to some level, to some degree. Typically the type of things that are going to be improved is like UX, right? So the dashboard type of elements, you can have like a very basic dashboard and you can improve that later. It's likely that, if you're selling to enterprises, the expectations in terms of technical reliability, security, all those things are much greater. So oftentimes it's better to launch something that's just, if you're selling to companies, something that's appropriate for mid-market, push that out, build it to a level where it's successful in the mid-market level, and then kind of raise the stakes and go to enterprise. When you know to release it and what to release, I think is such a unique situation. If I would say that all things being equal, err on the side of just doing it rather than on caution, because there's so many things that are going to change as you develop and iterate your product. You can't possibly predict all of them. So you might as well get it out there first, get feedback, and then work on it as you grow, because otherwise you're never really going to go. And I don't know if you know this, but if you go into Facebook, there's a wall right across from Mark Zuckerberg's office, and on it is "done is better than perfect," and that's the kind of the mentality of their entire company. Is just get it done, move it out, ship it, and then we'll figure out the details later.
Okay. And how do you look at this difference? Because as you said, the launch code, it's a solution or it's a product. As you said, it's something similar that other people will say, but the packaging that you created and the framework that you created makes sense, and you can 100% deliver on the promise that you have. And how you make this distinction, because it was very nice when I heard it from you in a podcast that I listened previously. The difference between solution and the product.
Yeah.
Can you go deeper into this?
Into the actual system itself, or?
Yes. And how you see the difference between solution and the full solution and the product? Because most of the time I have a product that I use in a bigger solution.
Okay. So you're talking about just generally as a founder, how you would make that distinction? Yes.
Well, sorry for not asking it correctly, but I got enthusiastic.
Okay. All right. So if I understand correctly, you're saying, what do you focus on, the product or you focus on the solution?
Yes.
In your communication?
Yes.
I believe you should focus on the solution, and the delivery of the solution is through your product. So I think the relationship there is, here's the problem that you've experienced, dear customer or potential prospect. This is what we've discovered, and we are now going to provide this solution. That solution consists of one product, two products, three products, right? So the product itself is simply a set of features that delivers the solution. I'm trying to think of a quick example. So let's go to Dexery as an example, right? So Dexery, the problem they solve is, there are a bunch of warehouses that have got a tremendous amount of inventory. Warehouse managers don't have a lot of clarity on what's going on in the inventory. They don't know what the inventory is going in, what's going out, what's the status of it. Their solution to that is to create a up-to-date digital picture of that warehouse, and that warehouse picture is created and updated with the use of autonomous robots that basically scan these 10,000 square foot or square meter warehouses in a matter of a few hours, up to 12 meters high, and gives a very, 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 very specific understanding of pallet number 6 on shelf number 4 is missing something here, investigate further, right? In that particular situation, the solution is the actual platform that is then providing the information that the customer needs in order to have clarity on what's in the warehouse. The product, technically, is the robot, which is effectively doing the scanning, right? So that's somehow like a subset of the solution. And as the company has grown, it has added additional product elements, additional levels of features, additional insights. Obviously now with this AI revolution, they're already introducing products that are anticipating the needs of the management of the warehouse, because they're going to look at trends and make concessions of what's coming up, right? So there's different layers of that, but I think the fundamental product solution, problem solution connection exists at that level, and then you're simply developing additional characteristics of the product that match that. So to go back to the original point I made, when do you release the product? Well, when you've got something that matches that problem solution, right? When you've got something there. But then you can add all sorts of levels of detail and additional features at a later stage, but that's not something that you should wait to do and then release the product, because you don't even know if a lot of those features that you've added are going to be relevant for your target customer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. And it started to how it's called, I had it in Romanian, but in English it went away. The role started to roll in my head, and I started to get some ideas. And I was thinking that now at the moment I'm building a startup that it's helping enterprise selling startups.
Okay. And what problem does it address?
Fixing the trust part, because most of the time it's quite hard to get the trust, and we are fixing that through content. Because you need high quality content to be delivered online, to have blogs, to have like everywhere, to blind spot every, every corner where some champion will need some information to be used in a discussion in the company to push the sales forward.
Okay.
like to understand the symptoms, the problems, and so on.
Okay. And is your solution, is it a platform that then gives people access to information, or what is it exactly?
It's a platform that it's helping them, like it's a platform that it's helping them generate that content.
Okay, helping them is the founders or the startups generate the
Yes, and the
content.
sales, yeah.
And that content is generated online, or is it generated specifically for a specific enterprise, or what's the
No, it's generated based on their knowledge
on whose
and
knowledge?
based the knowledge of the seller, of the startup who is selling to enterprise.
Okay, all right. So you're building credibility by proving their understanding of the
Yeah,
industry or
and
the vertical or the
expertise.
content and expertise. Okay, all right. And how
Yes.
can somebody access that content if I'm an enterprise that is talking to this company?
Most of the time you're selling through people. At the moment you have like the idea of a company brand, it's dying, and most now you sell through people who are like online, LinkedIn,
Right.
X platforms, Medium, Substack. You're
Okay.
writing stuff about your industry and you start to gather subscribers, people who are liking your content, and so on.
I see. Okay. Well, without obviously understanding all of the detail of what you offer, what I think
Yeah, yeah.
here you want to say is, we're is it a technology or content production platform that helps early stage companies selling to enterprises to build credibility and trust by developing content relevant to their target customers.
Yes, but I was thinking like this is the solution and the product it's like I was thinking the solution is the full experience of selling to enterprise
Yeah.
and unlocking the enterprise flywheel, to
Customers.
say like
Yeah.
this,
Mm-hmm.
and the product it's the tool that is generating the content.
Yeah, and but I guess in this case the solution would be what benefit are you offering, right? The benefit is I guess you're shortening the sales cycle or you're enabling them to build trust more quickly, right? So there would be something there that would enable these startup founders to move through that process and that pipeline more quickly. So if I were positioning this, I would say, hey, startup founder, are you looking to sell your solution to enterprises? You generally lack credibility because you don't have the experience or the logos. We're here to help you by offering you an approach or a system that helps you build credibility and shorten the sales cycle by doing such. And then the by doing whatever it is the actual product that you're offering,
Okay.
right? So the solution is kind of the benefit that you're offering, and then the product is whatever system that you're using or approach. In my mind, in my business, that's the launch code, right? That's my how am I delivering it or what am I delivering? But the actual outcome I'm delivering is you'll close more deals in less time.
Okay, so basically the solution is closing the deals.
Yeah, yeah. Or in this particular case, if you can be more specific, because you don't necessarily will not help them close deals, but you'll shorten the sales cycle. Like one of the biggest challenges I think
Okay.
a lot of founders have is they have they put so much time and effort into this. And if you're saying I'm going to help you shorten your sales cycle because you're going to build credibility faster, that actually is something much more specific and tangible. And as a result, easy to understand rather than say, I'll help you close more deals, right? Which is a bit broad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think this is actually an interesting lesson, right? So as you go through the process, you might start broad in the way that you communicate about your solution, but as you go through the process, you should be looking how to narrow it so that it becomes the perfect solution to a very specific problem. And I think one of the mistakes that a lot of founders make is they keep it very broad, and as a result, it's much more difficult to understand how you're different or unique or what problem you're actually solving. Because people don't buy, as I said, they don't buy features, they buy benefits. Like, what is it that you're actually going to help me do more quickly or in a better way?
Super nice. But I wanted to continue the discussion because you just like in tennis, the ball was at the net, and I want to put it back in your court.
Right.
How do you approach in launch code the idea of niching down?
Mm-hmm.
Because as you said, people are so compelled to go that everyone needs my market, everyone needs my product, yada yada yada.
Yeah. Well, you can niche down in one of a couple of different ways. First is the problem itself. You can niche down, right? So the way I like to describe it is, an example I give in the book is, Amazon. When we think of Amazon today as a platform that sells everything to everybody, it didn't start that way, right? It sold a single product to a single type of customer, right? It sold books to basically who was using the internet in the mid 90s. It was young men with a technology background who wanted to access books they couldn't find elsewhere, right? That was the clear problem that they were solving, and they did it. And so the more you can niche down at the beginning, it creates what I call the tip of your spear, right? So it's what breaks through the wall of attention and gets people to understand that, so this is something that could be relevant for me. The second thing you do is you niche down the customer that you sell to, right? So, you might have a solution that is relevant to a whole bunch of different types of customers, right? Because they share the problem. Again, to use myself as an example, it's not just founders that have sales challenges. Corporations have sales challenges. Government agencies have sales challenges. Charities have sales challenges. All sorts of type of organizations do. I choose to narrow my focus on tech founders because that's where I believe the problem is more acute. That's where I believe that the problem awareness is much more relevant. And I know how to, speak to founders. I know how to reach them. So that level of niching down helps clarify the communication style I use, the platforms I use, all of the different tools that you use to reach out to the customer. So problems a niche and then audience niche ultimately I think is where you can narrow down. And the thing that you have to overcome, because the natural inclination is, the metaphor I use is, you've got this net and you try to build this net so broad it covers the entire lake, right? And you're thinking, I'm going to catch a lot more fish if I cover the entire lake. Well, actually, if you find the little portion of the lake right around the corner where all the fish gather and you can lay that net on that portion, you're going to be much more efficient in catching a lot more fish than trying to cover everything, right? And that's what you have to understand and accept as a foundational principle. And it's hard, right? Even today, and I have this argument a lot with founders. It's like, yes, actually focusing requires you to say no to certain things, but the minute you focus down, the more likely it is you will build traction. And at some stage, once you have built your problem solution connection very clearly, you will be able to expand. But in the same way that Amazon didn't launch with, yes, you can buy baby formula and cars and books at the start, it started with you can buy books. And then, 15 years later, you can buy everything, right? So that's the way to look at it.
Okay. Going to the end of the podcast, I was like really curious. What was the moment that you decided you will write the launch code? Like, what was the context at that moment?
So I had this idea of writing a book for many years. So I mentioned earlier in my family, I grew up in a family of academics. My dad wrote 25 books. My mom wrote 8.
Whoa.
So I grew up in a family of writers.
Legacy.
I had a legacy to live up to. But obviously that's not enough of a reason to write a book. What I realized is that over time, I was finding that I was seeing just the same problems, the same issues, the same challenges coming up over again. And I just thought a book would be a fantastic way to spread the word and build the understanding of my solution to a broader audience, right? And there was one moment in time when it really, really clicked for me. I was actually at a conference. It was a conference in Slovenia. And there was a company founder I'd worked with named Simon Neal. He runs a company called Camp Map. And we had worked together on a virtual basis for about 6 months. And I had spoken at the conference, and we were at the drinks, and we were having drinks. And I ran into him and said, "Hey, Simon, good to see you. How are things going?" And he looked at me and said, "Zoltan, you literally saved my business." And I thought, well, that's a really wonderful thing to say. Tell me more. And he went on to explain how he'd applied the principles of the launch code to his business and went from kind of 3 months runway to scaling. And I think now he's went from 1 market to about 9 markets, and he's closing about 50% of his leads. And other than saying to myself, well, that's a great story for a book, which by the way is in the book, it's also a great indication of like, this can have a real impact on people. And I think I really wanted to share this. And so far, the book's been out for 3 months, and I'll give you 3 examples. I guess somebody who had bought my book in Spain at a conference I read posted on LinkedIn from Colombia with a picture of my book and their team, and he said, "Hey, we just used the launch code to refashion our entire sales strategy, and thanks so much." I had a guy out of Minnesota in the United States write me saying, "Hey, I just read your book. I've been thinking about launching my own business for ages. You finally gave me the final push I needed to do this." And you hear stories like that and you think, wow, that's really great, because there's no way in hell anybody would have ever heard about me and my book or my approach from Colombia and Minnesota in the United States had I not had the book. And so I think that's a great example of the impact and also a great reason to promote it and to support it and I hope that more and more founders get the benefits of reading the book and applying the principles to their business.
Nice. Can you get a little bit into the details of the launch code?
Sure.
And for the people who are listening to understand what they will gonna get through it, because I believe that one of the things that it was striking for me was the quotes that you had on the right side of the pages, and they're like really inspiring for the first part. And the second thing that it attracted me is everywhere you had an example. It's not a theory, it's just a book that gives you the understanding that someone went through this and it had success, so you can follow those steps.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the most important steps I took as part of the whole book writing process. That I went back and I interviewed over 25 of my customers to see what had happened with them since we started working together. So all of those stories and examples are reflected in the book itself, which is what you're referring to. And if I'm very honest, that's what makes it work, right? Because if it's just me sitting there saying, oh, this is what you should be doing, but I don't have any examples of how actually it's done, it's just an empty promise. So that was a very important part. And it was great to see some of the incredible stories of companies that applied the principles to their business and see the benefits. As far as the launch code is concerned, it's built on 3 pillars, each of them addressing a specific problem that most founders face, right? So the first is about focusing your offer message so customers understand why they should buy what you're selling, right? It really, really helps you focus your value proposition, your product offering, the messaging you use, how you communicate about yourself online, in your meetings, in your emails. Everything is captured in that first pillar. In the second pillar, it helps you structure your client acquisition so you close more deals with less effort. And it focuses on kind of the 3 typical channels: outbound sales, partnerships, and inbound marketing. And in each of those, it provides very clear frameworks of how to go about the process of outbound sales, how you narrow your focus, how you reach out to people, what's the process you go through to take them through your pipeline. And the same goes with the other 2. And then finally, the third piece is scale your operations so you can focus on strategy and you empower your team. And that's where it goes from it's just me as a founder to actually I can't do this forever. I need to somehow scale. And so it creates the guidelines or the guardrails for setting goals, tracking your performance, hiring your team for certain roles. And at the end of this whole process, if you start at the beginning and go through the process at the end, you'll go from probably a lack of understanding and maybe a bit of fear about the process to a really clear blueprint that you can apply immediately to your business and ultimately end up building confidence in your ability to sell and then to grow your business in a meaningful way. And the book in itself captures not just the practical elements, but brings all of these to life through stories and examples, and talks about some of the fundamental mindset shift that you have to go through. So I think it's a pretty good example of how you can approach the whole sales and marketing process as a founder.
Nice. What was the motivation to become a How to Web speaker? Why How to Web?
Look, I've been very active on these kind of innovation and startup and technology events for the last 5 years. When I first started my business called the Launch Code to help and work with early stage founders to help them sell and market their products to enterprise customers, I knew that one of the best ways to build my profile and also to spread the word was through these speaking engagements. So I've always considered How to Web one of those stages that I'd love to be on at one stage. And, it seems like it's obviously in a great market. Romania is a fantastic market and one that's consistently growing. I've worked with a lot of Romanian founders. So I think this is the right time and the right place to be on stage and share my insights on sales to founders in the country.
What are the things that people should expect from you meeting you in How to Web, like how it will be?
Well, I'll be on stage in a couple of different capacities. So I'll be doing a keynote on B2B sales, specifically founder-led sales, which is the topic that I talk about most commonly, especially since the publication of my book called The Launch Code in the spring. So I'll be sharing some of the insights from that and my work with over 200 founders across 26 countries, including Romania. And I'll be sort of sharing some insights there. I'm also going to be doing a fireside chat with Andrei Dănescu, who's the founder of Dextry, which is actually a fantastically successful business, as you well know. They're kind of in the logistics space. Andre and his co-founder Juana and their third co-founder, basically built this business and has achieved tremendous success, both in terms of traction and revenue, but also in fundraising. And I'll actually be interviewing Andre on stage. And what makes it particularly interesting, I think, for the audience is that I actually met the team very early on. So I think it was probably after COVID. So 2021, I was actually their mentor in an accelerated program called X Europe. And we were matched up almost by accident. And so we started working together. And it was right at the moment when they had pivoted from working with retail to logistics. And so actually in that work we did together, I helped them in a lot of the work they did in terms of repositioning and messaging and reevaluating their commercial direction. And so after that program, we had developed such a strong relationship that I then continued to work with them on a commercial basis, helping them to scale their business, worked with Andre, helping him to adapt to growing from an 8-person company to a 160-person company, and actually invested in the company in their Series A round as well. So in that capacity, I've seen them grow from just 8 people with some minimal revenue to what they are today, which is basically a 160-person organization with close to 10 million of ARR, and having raised something in the range of 120 million euros, I believe, in their funding round. So I've seen the tiny startup grow into a really fantastic company. I think that'll be an interesting conversation for the audience. And obviously the connection to the connection to Romania makes it particularly interesting, I think, for the audience. But I think a lot of the lessons that the Dextery has gathered and what I'm sure Andre will share on stage will be relevant, of course, to any founders, especially those founders coming from Central and Eastern Europe. And then just to finish off my answer to your question, which is, well, I'll be present. So I'll be doing the keynote, I'll be doing the fireside chat, but then also be doing a book signing. So I'll be there'll be an opportunity for the founders to get access to my book, and I've now done that in at least 10 or 12 different countries in the last 6 months, and I think it's a great opportunity to have a chat and to get the book firsthand. And so I'm really looking forward to that combination of things that I'll be there and working closely with the event organizers to make it as valuable to the audience as possible.
I would be in that queue, so no worries about it. At least you'll have one.
Absolutely, yeah.
Have you attended previously How to Web, or this is the first time?
This will be the first time. I've been in conferences in Romania before and many in the region, but I've never been to How to Web. So this will be a personal new experience for me as well.
Cool. I was really curious if you saw something or you felt something that it's different from any other conference, and I was curious if you saw that, and if it's the first visit. I was curious, besides being the conference and the number of people, if there was something that made you come closer to How to Web.
Well, look, I can speak in general terms. Having attended, I'm guessing, at least 50 conferences in the last 5 years. I think the best ones kind of have 3 qualities. One is there's a lineup on stage which is attractive in terms of the quality of the speakers and the quality of the topic. So there certainly is an important element there. I think the second is it's big enough to attract a meaningful audience, but not so big that you could get lost, right? So I've been on the extremes of the 80,000 person web summit, which is so big it's almost unmanageable. And then I've been in some conferences where there were a few hundred people, and you sort of don't have that mix of audience that really gives you that benefit. I think having that sort of sweet spot in the middle, I think, makes How to Web very interesting. And the third is that obviously it's the connections you make, right? So it's the people you meet, it's the relationships you start building. I think in this digital world that we now all live in, these personal connections are so valuable, and probably even more valuable than they've ever been in the past. And just having the opportunity to meet people face to face, begin conversations, and then continuing them in the virtual world makes the whole process much more effective. And I'm looking forward to meeting as many founders as possible in that environment.
Good. If you can make a short sales pitch, and it's kind of hard to give it to you, for your presentation, if we can stream this to someone and make him be on the first row of your presentation, can you do it in 30 seconds?
Well, I'll do my best. So if you're a founder who is focused on product, focused on technology, and you recognize the importance of sales as a key to growing your business and kind of bringing to life the business that you have in your head, then what you're going to get from my presentation is an insight into how you can do that in a kind of effective and productive way, but also learn from some of the insights that I've gathered from hundreds of other founders who are exactly in your position and how they solve this problem. Because ultimately, one of my favorite sayings is nothing happens until somebody sells something. So you have to be able to learn how to sell, even if it doesn't feel comfortable, even if it's not in your sweet spot. But once you adopt some of these principles and, more importantly, the mindset to sell, what you'll actually find is you might actually transition from somebody who fears it or doesn't feel great about it to actually enjoying it. And I think that's my key takeaway, is that anybody can learn to sell. You just have to understand the mindset and the strategies. And once you adopt those, you're going to be much more likely to build the business that you've dreamt about.
Thank you very much, Zoltan. It was a pleasure listening to you, and for sure I will listen again this podcast. Other than that, yeah, I have to remember there were so many moments when you left my mouth open and I was like, oh my God, this guy has so many things I need to understand. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mircea.
At the same time, I think we're going to see each other in some months at How to Web.
Absolutely. Look forward to that.
So for sure that will be an interesting experience, and don't miss, I will not miss your presentation and I will be there. Hopefully I will not be if I will be in the spotlight, I will have my reasons not to be next to your stage, but other than that I will be near to you. So thank you very much for everything. It was very inspiring, and for sure I'm going to go back and read again some of the chapters from your book, because
Great.
Now you created some open loops in my head.
Great. Well, listen, if for those of your listeners who might be interested in learning more about me and what I offer, if you go on to if you have to go to LinkedIn, I'm the only Zoltan Vardy there, so you can reach out to me through LinkedIn. But I also wanted to make an offer for your audience. If you go to zoltanvardy.com/book, so zoltanvardy.com/book, you can actually sign up and you get a free first chapter of my book. And you get an opportunity to review it and test it, and then you can actually buy the book on Amazon. It's available in print and ebook, and very soon in audiobook format as well. So
I'm looking forward.
You can get all three. So I'd encourage the founders who maybe were inspired by this conversation to look into that.
We're gonna put the link into the bio. So
Okay.
Thank you very much for mentioning it. I forgot to ask it, but very spot on. So other than that, thank you very much and see you in some months.
Thanks very much, Mircea. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Știu, e finalul podcastului și vreau să-ți mulțumesc că ai ajuns până aici. Și în același timp partenerilor BCR, Google, How to Web și start-up.ro. Iar până la următorul episod, ca să ai ce face, te așteptăm pe Launch.ro, să intri în comunitatea Launch Romania, unde găsești evenimente și inițiative Loved by Launch. Bye!